Hi, welcome students for the next session. In this session, we will be looking at properties of water. We will be looking at properties of water. So when we talk about water, what comes into our mind is nothing but basically thirst. So when you are near a source of water or when you are far away from water, you will always experience this urge for having water. So this is what we call thirst. Unlike most substances, water normally has many characteristics, and because of this characteristic, water is regarded to be very important and dependent in all the lives. So we mean that water unique properties allow life to exist on earth. Without water, there will be no life. That is basically the fact. It's just a fact. That is why when scientists go to other planets, if they are looking for life, then they look for traces of water. The main ideas that we will be looking here is that life depends on hydrogen bonds in water, 2, many compounds dissolve in water, and 3, some compounds form acids or bases. Some compounds form acids or bases. So we will go directly to our first main idea here, which is life depends on hydrogen bonds in water. So when we are talking about life here, we are talking about all biological processes being dependent on water, being dependent on water. So when we are looking at the transportation system, for example, so water helps in transportation of materials from one area of materials from one part of the body, from one part of the body to another. How is this achieved? Through the circulatory system. Also water, all the chemical reactions take place in water. So because water is a universal solvent, many of the unique salts will dissolve in water. Apart from this, water is also important in maintaining cell structure. When we are talking of cell structure here, we are talking about a structure being dependent on water. So without water, the cell will lose its structure, and if it loses its structure, it might fail to perform its functions. So structure is normally, as we saw in previous units, is related to the function of an organism. Here we will go directly into an introductory part about water. We will go into introductory part about water and how important water is. So dependent life normally depends on water. And when we are talking of water, life being dependent on water, we mean water and hydrogen bonds. We mean water and hydrogen bonds. So what is one of the characteristics of water is that it has these hydrogen bonds which make it unique. One is, unlike most substances, water expands when it freezes. So unlike most substances, water freezes. Water freezes. Water freezes. So how is it important? Or how is this important? Think of organisms that are dependent on water being in an area which is frozen, or the entire place is frozen. We take an example during winter seasons. So during winter, the whole area might be frozen, but still water will freeze to form ice. So water forms ice. So water is less dense as a solid. That is a fact. Water is less dense as a solid. So now we are trying to see why it is important for water to freeze. Because when water is a solid, it becomes less dense than as a liquid. This is important because, as for example, during winter, the ice will come above the water. The ice will be above the water. This is, for example, water. So the upper part will be covered by ice. So the upper part will be covered by ice. As this happens, we have many organisms living down here which will survive the winter just because of the fact that these ice which has frozen on top prevents the lower part of the water to become solid. So ice acts as an insulator. Ice acts as an insulator. Ice acts as an insulator that allows the water underneath to remain a liquid. That allows the water underneath to remain a liquid. This is important because if this water remains liquid, then organisms that are living here will be able to survive harsh conditions like winter. A water molecule is made of two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom. So normally what happens is that normally the center of oxygen has 8 protons. So it will have the capacity to pull the electrons towards itself. When this happens, this portion of the electron cloud becomes negative, and this other portion, of course, becomes positive. So because water has partially a part of it being positive and part of it being slightly negative, then we call water a polar molecule. Water is a polar molecule. Water is a polar molecule. So polarity is formed when atoms in molecules have unequal pools on the electrons they share, as you have seen here. So this continuous tug of war between electrons keeps the water molecule always polar. So in a water molecule, the oxygen nucleus, as I said, with 8 protons attracts the shared electrons more strongly than do the hydrogen nuclei, and the hydrogen atoms gain a small positive charge. So other molecules called non-polar molecules do not have these charged regions. Other molecules lack these regions, lack these charges. Because they lack these charges, we say they are non-polar. They are non-polar. They are non-polar molecules. We say they are non-polar molecules. For example, one example of a non-polar molecule is a fat. And normally they will have they have shared electrons. They share their electrons more equally, and therefore they don't have these opposing charges. So opposite charges of polar molecule can interact to form hydrogen bonds. So this, we will be looking at it here. Let me expand our video presentation so that it's clear or how this happens. So if we look at the whole universe, all organisms, for example, here, all our bodies, they have cells. All these cells contain water, and if they didn't contain water, then what happened? They will lose their shape, and if they will lose their shape, then they'll not be able to function, and the entire organism will be in jeopardy. The entire organism will be in jeopardy. These cells come up and make tissues, and tissues make organs, and tissues make organs like the intestines, like the liver, like the kidneys and the heart. So what I mean here is that these are all dependent of water because they are made of cells, and as we have seen, all cells cannot exist without water. Still, even the inside, the entire part of the cell, even the nucleus, all of them require water. So all chemical processes that take place in a cell, be it protein synthesis, be it respiration, and so forth, they all depend on water. They all depend on water. It means if we didn't have water, then what happens? So here we have a molecule of water. Here we have oxygen. We are having 2 hydrogen. So an oxygen with 2 hydrogen gives what we call water. As we saw earlier in the presentation, we saw that because this has around 8 electrons, so the chemical property that describes the tendency of an atom to attract electrons to itself brings about what we called polarity. Brings about what we called polarity, and it is called electronegativity. So that tendency is called electronegativity, and it brings about what we call polarity. As you can see, what happens here is that these portions will become slightly negative, and this other side will become slightly positive. So a chemical property that describes the tendency of an atom to attract electrons or electron density towards itself, which we are calling electronegativity, brings about this tendency. So if we have many molecules of water, they will develop these what we are calling hydrogen bonds. So these hydrogen bonds will connect each water molecule to another water molecule. These hydrogen bonds are in fact responsible for majority of the properties of water, as we will be looking at them slightly one by one. As we will be looking at them slightly one by one. So having this polarity gives water a very important ability. For example, opposite charges of polar molecules can interact to form hydrogen bonds. So opposite charges of polar molecules can interact to form hydrogen bonds. As seen earlier, hydrogen bonds is an attraction between slightly positive hydrogen atom and a slightly negative atom, often oxygen and nitrogen. So some of these elements which have the tendency to bring about polarity include oxygen or nitrogen. So these two are known to bring about polarity. Hydrogen bonds are part of the structures of proteins and of DNA. Are part of the structures of DNA, so are part of the structures of proteins and DNA. So if DNA is the most important part that stores generic information that is passed from one organism to another, and it is dependent on hydrogen bond, then you can see that hydrogen bond is very important in the biological systems. So we'll stop here for this video. In the next video, we'll be looking at properties related to hydrogen bonds.